Welcome to the Wealth Lend podcast. Today we're joined by two of our advisors and we're going to talk about a number of different topics, which include recent inheritance tax planning changes in state pension legislation, pension drawdowns, and lots of other topics. I'm joined by Thomas Parsons from Headway Wealth. If I was to ask you what areas of financial planning you specialise in, what would they be?
So I've got a kind of client base split between the UK and abroad. So I've got a lot of expat clients, so cross-border financial planning, tax planning that tries to help mitigate UK tax for expats living and retiring abroad. And then for the UK clients, it would be everyday financial planning, so retirement planning, inheritance tax planning, investments and tax planning, really. So that's a kind of a summary, I'd say.
Excellent. Same question for you, Elliot. What areas do you think are your specialist subjects in financial planning?
I very much spend my time helping British expats living overseas, so cross-border financial planning, primarily British expats who've gone up and relocated themselves to the US or Middle East or somewhere overseas and are looking for UK-based financial planning, retirement planning, cash flow modelling, all the exciting stuff.
Why do you think expats enjoy working with a UK advisor in a UK regulated firm?
So having spent some of my career working overseas, I'd say just the understanding of UK tax laws and UK products whilst dealing with non-UK residents puts us in a good place, because what that means is that, one, we can often get access to some products that an overseas firm wouldn't, in terms of investments or pension schemes, but also just having the day-to-day. I say a lot of my clients live in the UK and I advise them as per a UK resident, but for clients living abroad, they would sometimes need a little bit of different advice, but the sort of fundamentals of that UK advice and the regulation and, all of the training and CPD we do on the back of it very much is the sort of fundamentals to those clients too.
And what about the benefits of working with a UK advisor in terms of fees, Elliot? What do you think is the main benefits of working with a UK financial advisor?
As Tom said, the benefits of that UK framework for advice is it's heavily regulated. The underlying firm that's delivering the advice has to be regulated. And what does that mean? They have to follow, stringent compliance, regulatory oversight on all the advice. Everything from top to bottom is really with the client at the forefront of the advice. And then the advisor's super well qualified, well trained, every year making sure that they are, up to a certain level of advice. That just gives the client total peace of mind that the advice they're getting is regulated, it's protected under the Ombudsman Service, and the firm that's looking after them carries all of the protection and the regulatory oversight. And then the advisor, 99% of the time, is going to be super well qualified and follow a super strict process. From an advice fee perspective, again, with the client being the focus and the forefront of everything, it goes without saying it's fee-based, it's low cost. If we're delivering products or setting up new investments with a client, everything's super low cost. Whereas, as we've all read and seen overseas, that isn't necessarily the case with a non-regulated advice firm. They might be offering commission-based products or, heavy, high fees to go with the advice that might not necessarily have the client best interest at heart.
Anything in terms of fees, and something that I find is almost a difficulty in being a UK financial advisor is the level of transparency that we have in our suitability reports. So quite often what you were saying about commission-based products, they don't actually show the impact that the fees have on a client's portfolio, do they? And what we have to obviously show a client is the impact of the fees. So we charge a client an initial fee. So that fee is paid up front. So the client knows exactly what they're paying for their advice and how much they're going to pay for the advice across the course of the term. And that's something that I think for a UK advisory firm is trying to instill that into a client. They automatically think they're paying less because there's no initial fee in a lot of the offshore advice. And it's not until they've been a client for 4 or 5 years and they see this, it's almost like this drag on the growth. They don't see the elements of growth in the offshore plans that they have because of the inclusion of the indemnified commission and stuff like that. So, and in terms of the types of clients that you seem to pick up a lot of, Tom?
Again, it's difficult to answer because there will be a wider spectrum than this, but I'd say if I picked out sort of my average demographic of a client, it would be very close to retirement, within 5 years of retirement or even about to retire, just because I think that's when people start to really think about things. So in terms of the international non-UK resident clients, quite often pension schemes in the UK are quite limited in terms of the options that they offer somebody. So if you live abroad, you'll really struggle to buy an annuity. And then if you have a pension, it often doesn't give you drawdown. So it sometimes makes kind of people, when they're getting close to the point in which they're going to take their pension, need to take advice. And therefore we would often maybe get those sort of inquiries when someone's quite close to retirement. But then, as I say, it's quite difficult to say that's my average client, because then someone that may have been someone 10 years ago and they're now 10 years into retirement and starting to think more about inheritance tax planning. So it's kind of that's really the whole point of the job, is the journey along the way.
Do you, being somebody that, like me, has just hit 40, do you see a lot more, especially in the UK, younger people engaging with a financial advisor?
Appreciate the age reference. It's tricky for me to say in the UK. 90% of the people I speak to are British expat living overseas or expat living in the UK. But there has definitely been a shift to, whether it be globalization, people moving overseas, people going to Saudi, people going to the US, people following a new kind of career path. Definitely an increase in younger professionals reaching out, who are earning more money, getting paid different kind of compensation packages with shares, not just salary, and needing assistance. Whether that's because they're an American living in the UK and are really worried about how to accumulate wealth, what type of structures to use, or the other way, whether it's somebody who's lived and worked in the UK and gone and live overseas, there's definitely an increase of people reaching out.
And how do you, in a new world of not jumping on a plane every week to go and see clients, how do you make it work being a financial advisor in the UK, having clients, so many clients that are living overseas?
Yeah, I think technology's helped massively for everyone. I mean, we all use Microsoft Teams for speaking to clients. It's a lot easier. I mean, I can have several meetings with the same client in the same week now, whereas if I was seeing someone face to face in Europe, it would have been a little bit more difficult to do that. And then just kind of our systems as a company that we have. So we have a CRM system which allows clients to communicate both with us and the back office team.
Yeah, I mean, without being brand specific, Teams, the various video calling softwares, without them, what were we? 6-7 years ago, we were all flying around to see clients, whereas now super efficient. We can follow a very strict process of 1 or 2 meetings, gathering information, delivering advice, all conducted on a video call.
And other technology that's helped us be more efficient. How has AI helped you more recently in the last 12 to 18 months be more efficient?
One of the biggest things that's helped us develop over the last year is the AI tools we're using in terms of the sort of note-taking system that we have, and that plugs straight into our team. So whilst we can, sitting down with someone face-to-face, we can still use it. It's a lot more efficient when it's via Teams because it's already plugged into that. And that gives clients recordings to an extent, but transcripts of everything we've spoken about, which is great because it's good for us because we get as much information as possible to be taken down, but also the amount of times a client's left a meeting and then a few months later asked me something that we discussed, that's now in black and white for them to take away. So that's another big thing that's helped us, I would say, over the last year.
Yeah, because there are pros and cons of, not being able to, of not flying everywhere and being able to sit video meetings for every hour of the day. But if you end up with a week where you've got 20 meetings in your diary, 10 new introductions, 10 reviews of clients, each one of those clients, understandably so, will require a follow-up email. They'll require a summary of the call, a summary of the advice. Like, without those note-taking tools and without AI, I mean, I can't even imagine how many hours I used to spend doing that. Whereas now, I'm sure like everybody else, all I need to do is allocate a 15-minute window between meetings. You can get a drink, send the meeting note transcript out with a few clicks of a button and move on to the next one.
Yeah.
The beauty of it is as well, the technology that we do use highlights any vulnerabilities. It gives us the ability to be able to focus on what the client is saying as opposed to writing down notes. So you used to have pages and pages and pages of notes that we'd made and information that we had to try and get accurate, whereas if there's anything that we weren't 100% sure of, we can go back to. As a business owner, it highlights the vulnerabilities. If, God forbid, we ever had complaints, that we can go back and see exactly what was said, exactly what advice was given. And the beauty of having AI within the business is it just helps everybody across the board. It helps paraplanners and administrators get the correct information because they can see everything that's been discussed with a client. And if something doesn't make sense to them, they can go back to the transcript and really delve into it a bit more.
like you say, it empowers the client. I mean, you think of that old previous advisor-client relationship. It would be a paper-based fact find, where you would sit down, make lots of notes, draw, no doubt, some retirement modeling, and it would all be based on this beautiful document that we'd be super proud of that we would take away with us, and then you would send the client a summary. But like now, as soon as that meeting's done, either we've used some interactive software to simulate their retirement, simulate their assets, way more interactive with them, and you share that information with them. It's just so much more empowering of them being involved in the process, personally anyway.
And I also feel, going back to what you said about the video, I've got certain clients that like the face-to-face interaction, but without a doubt, being able to share your screen, especially when you're going through a cash flow modeling session and you're going through all sorts of different scenarios, helping people plan income needs and tax. I could do that, turn my screen around, turn it back, turn it around. That had them literally being able to see my screen and what I'm doing throughout that session is much more powerful than sitting down with someone face to face. Or just quite often I'll share my screen and just search. If it's like I want to show some sort of like past performance data on the S&P, just being able to share my screen, quickly search it and show them there and then, it's so much more powerful. Just you've got the world at your fingertips to share anything you want. Whereas when you're face to face and your laptop's in your bag, it's a little bit less
engaging,
interactive and engaging.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Going back to the type of clients that we have, obviously you and I deal a lot more with people that are UK residents that were once expats. How do you think the fact that you were an expat and have repatriated has helped you with your advice journey with clients, knowing that you've already done it?
I mean, I can't even put that into words how powerful that is. And just because I know like the market, I mean, the international advice market is very different to the UK, specifically around the type of investment providers and pension schemes, etc., that are set up for people when they're living abroad. Dealing with overseas pensions as well. I mean, we've had clients that have had pensions in Guernsey, the Isle of Man, Bermuda. There's all sorts of different countries, Ireland, all sorts of different countries that I've looked at someone's overseas pensions and been able to give some sort of level of advice on it. So if I was a UK advisor dealing with UK residents only and never looked at that kind of thing, I wouldn't even know where to start looking at those kind of plans when a client comes to us with an inquiry.
And similar kind of question. So now, obviously, when you are dealing with people that have children, has having a child yourself helped you almost emotionalize the advice when you're speaking to somebody that has kids? How has that been able to help you engage with them?
I think it's about understanding people's priorities, and I can kind of relate to that a little bit more. So I think perhaps if I was speaking to somebody, let's say in their late 30s previously, who just had a child, I probably wouldn't have been able to relate quite so much in terms of the cost around having a child and what the priorities are in terms of money in the short term. So whilst, I might be talking to them more about retirement planning, that is an important thing, but there's also other things in the short term like nursery fees and all that kind of stuff that I probably hadn't appreciated the cost involved. So and then I mean in terms of the protections, insurance is making sure people have got the right levels of cover. I'd say I knew the importance of it, but it's a lot easier to relate to that kind of thing when you've got children of your own.
Yeah, obviously having an older child yourself.
Yeah, I mean, as I was listening to that, it was a while ago since I had a young child, but lots resonated with me. I think the pieces that I have taken from kind of personal experience that have helped with planning is having gone and done the basics of planning myself, and that just consists of setting up a JISA for my son, that's hopefully going to contribute to guiding him through some university costs and life costs, and also setting up a junior SIP. It's not done a lot, not done enough, I don't think, is the point I was trying to make.
Do you know, since I've been back in the UK, I have literally come across 2 people out of all of my clients that have a kids SIP.
Yeah.
2 people.
Part of me gets it.
It's an investment you're making on someone that they're going to receive in 60 years. That's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's strange because it's the issue, but it's the advantage.
Oh, of course.
We all know the power of compounding. We all know starting early is always the best thing to do. Putting £100 a month in a junior SIP from when they're 16 to when they're 58, compounded at 12%, 1.4 million. I think we all know the power of that. But it's a strange one. I have thought about this is you want to help your child or your children out. You want to give them a head start, which is where a junior ISA ticks a lot of boxes, makes a lot of sense. The danger of that is at 18, that is their money.
Yeah.
You literally have no say. They get a letter. You get a letter to say child is 18 in X number of months. They're not.
Did they get the letter as well?
You both get the letter. So when they're 16, there's a flip, and I've just gone through this with my sons. At 16, what was a junior SIP in my control with my son as a named beneficiary. At 16, they then have rights over that SIP. So if you want to make any changes to contributions to investment strategies, they then also have to be a co-signature on it.
And then at 18, your signature removes completely?
I haven't got there, if I'm honest. I don't know that.
No,
but all I thought about was, look, I don't want to give my child handouts, or I don't want to, but, if anybody ever wants to give him, he's 18 next year, he's 21. If people want to give him some money of a substantial amount, that's far better off going into some form of savings than him to go buying a concert ticket,
Funny conversation, putting money aside for your kids, because I had this conversation with a client previously, and he said to me, when you come from nothing, you want to give your kids everything, but by giving your kids everything, you teach them nothing.
So true.
And where's that happy medium with that? Because once a kid is 18, if you've been giving them everything, they actually don't understand the value of money, and not necessarily because of the parents. I came from a very, very working class, frugal home that there wasn't a lot of money, and I know for a fact if my parents had the ability to put the money aside for me, they would have. But at the same time, I was very, very irresponsible at 18, and I know what some of my friends did with that money when they turned 18. So it's a very difficult one. But
yeah, and I don't think there's a right and a wrong. I've personally thought that a lot, in that, I grew up frugal setup, not loads of money, and I think the default is, I don't want my child to have that. You'd want them to feel like they're in a place of abundance. But then also, I think what gave me the hunger and the drive to go out and do things, well, it's because I didn't have it growing up. It's like it's a tricky one, and I think about it a lot. But I think I was listening to a podcast last week. Gentleman called Morgan Housel wrote a very famous book, Psychology of Money. He's got a new book out called The Psychology of Spending. If clients are ever looking for some good reads, they are very, very interesting reads. And he talks around the impact and influence that parents have on their children. And a lot of us, I was guilty of this, of thinking I need to openly discuss money and spending and, what you shouldn't do with your child. Actually, it's...
As in your own personal wealth, discussing that with your...
Yes, that, but also like giving them good, principles and intentions, and like, this is what you should do this, shouldn't do this. But psychologically, apparently, the child is far more beneficial for them just to watch what you do, follow what you do, just by being a responsible parent who's not, who budgets, who is mindful of, hey, we can and we can't do this. Like, not necessarily saying, hey, this is what we got in our bank account and this is how we live our lives, but just being mindful that your child is aware of how money works. I think from a psychological point of view is far more beneficial than sitting down and saying, right, if you earn £300, you need to put 100 away.
It's so difficult to picture it as well. I mean, if I think of, if my son inherited his junior ISA today and he's 3, but if he got his junior ISA today, he'd run to a shop and spend it all on Peppa Pig toys. And it's like, how do you picture that person at 18 and what kind of person are they going to be?
Yeah. Weirdly enough, I mean, again, this is all about me and my son. So I guess it's topical at the moment in my household, something I'm talking about a lot. He's just recently got his first job. He just got his first paycheck last week, and I've kept my mouth shut as to what my expectations are, or, it's his money. Do what you want. And he, approached me, right, I've been doing some research. I want to set up a savings account. I was like, okay, why? What's the purpose? He's like, well, I want to go on a holiday next year with my friends, Okay, fine. It turns out he's done some research, set up a savings account. He's going to basically put half of his income away. He knows he's got a SIP.
Half?
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen, but he's got a SIP, and he's like, right, I want to start putting, £20 a month away into my SIP. What? I was like, where are you getting this from? Expecting him to say, oh, because of you, you're fantastic. And he didn't. He said, oh, this YouTuber I follow, I can't remember his name, basically did like a business plan and breakdown of how he makes his money, where he makes his money, and how you should survive and how you should live. And I ended up watching a couple of minutes with him last night. And this, in fairness, what I would have thought, get off the TV, you're watching a load of rubbish. This YouTuber actually was being, pretty sensible, some decent planning, telling them they should save.
There's a lot more information available now, isn't
there?
For the young
My point
people.
is, you shouldn't always jump to think they're consuming crappy information. There's actually some really good, role models out there.
But I think that leads back to something you said earlier when you said about clients that are maybe younger. Obviously, I'm not talking your son's age, but maybe people in their 30s that perhaps don't take advice. I think there's, in my experience in the UK, and I guess I'm thinking about like my friends, all my friends know what I do for a living. I've probably got one or two of them that I've helped, and they're all, the ones that are earning well, they've got surplus income, and they're kind of self-educating through the internet. Whereas I guess
Podcasts, books,
it's just the way things are these days. So, I mean, I assume there'll become a time when they will need advice. 20 years time, when they suddenly think, actually, I'm 50 now, I'm not going to be able to retire when I need to, because there's a limitation to that. But that's certainly a lot more information out there to help.
There's a limitation now. Do you think there'll be a limitation in the future? And how do you think it's going to affect our industry?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. No one knows really, do they? We use at the moment tools to help people plan their retirement. Who knows that one day you might be able to just click a button on a website and then it tells you exactly what you need to do. And
yeah, I mean, look, there is always a certain type of individual that doesn't require financial planning, really. That's not necessarily in a screaming need for it. And I'm sure we all have. I met somebody yesterday and I was very honest with her and transparent and said, you don't need me right now. Your situation is relatively straightforward. Sounds like you've kind of done the right research. She figured out she needed a cash pot, figured out she needed to put a certain amount away for retirement, figured out this would be a sensible strategy to pay off the house. There was no cross-border advice or anything she needed. And my advice was genuinely continue on your path. If you want to engage someone like us, we can help you with formalize that plan. But in reality, you're kind of already there. So there's certain individuals where advice just isn't needed. But I mean, look, the reason we're in business is there are lots and lots and lots of families and individuals who situation is complex. They're moving countries. They've got assets in different country. ChatGPT or one of these various models will take them so far and say, you might have a problem with this, might have a problem with that. But can it actually contact the providers, contact the investment providers, loop in tax advisors, deal with the advice, oversee the whole process? No.
And also humanize it as well, because sometimes if you're someone's soundboard as a financial advisor, I think what you're going to find is there's a lot of backwards and forwards, whereas ChatGPT will give you an answer which might necessarily not work for a certain situation. It might not work for a certain jurisdiction. It certainly doesn't give answers to cross-border financial planning and for expats. So I genuinely think that if we just continue to embrace AI, but add that human element into what we do, because a lot of our clients are quite a bit older, wouldn't even consider using AI, but still, and still like to be able to pick up a phone or walk into an office and be able to speak to somebody face to face to feel that human element.
The human element is the key bit for the client. That's the bit that they get the value out of us. They might have an idea of when they want to retire and what country, and have a good idea of the amount of money they're going to need. Quite often, that client is just looking for a professional human relationship of somebody to really get into the detail of planning what that looks like, how everything works together, and ultimately through informed conversations, help make the decisions to retire, help them make the decisions to make life events. Like for me, that is the most rewarding part. And I was saying to my wife, I've had this so many times recently where our clients have said, like, thank you so much. Like, these consultations, this advice, the work we've been doing, has it genuinely helped me make the jump and retire?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this for years, just running all of these models, worst case, all of the financial modeling that we do with clients. That is the most rewarding bit. And that is the human interaction. Like, everybody has the ability and has had for 20, 30 years to run spreadsheets and produce financial modeling. And that doesn't give you the peace of mind that I should do something. It just supports it. And I think of course, we're about numbers, we're about the financial planning, we're about the support. But in reality, it's just that professional opinion that people are looking for of, I think what I've got is going to give me what I need. Can we model this? Can we plan it? And do you think this is the right thing? Quite often people are just looking for that human soundboard, reassurance.
Yeah. And I can think of a dozen clients or so that I've gone through that process of getting them close to that retirement age where they know when they can retire. When that retirement age comes and they're about to retire, we have 4 or 5 meetings just to reassure them again that they've got enough, because they've literally drafted their letter to their employer to leave and retire. But then the emotions are kicking in around, my income's about to stop. I know we've gone through this enough, but have I got enough? Have I got enough? And that's the sort of thing that people want from a human.
Definitely. And I think from a, job satisfaction, purpose of what we do, that's the most rewarding bit. I'll happily get into the weeds and the detail with clients on numbers and planning, but it's actually, there's a purpose to that. It's because it's going to enable them to do something, buy a house, send their son to uni, retire. That is why we plan.
How many clients do you think actually know what enough is? And how do you make them almost put the end goal onto a piece of paper and then work towards it. So what is enough for a client, and how many of them do you think actually know that what that end goal is, and how do you make them almost understand what it is?
A large part of what we do with financial planning, income planning and retirement is using software, using tools that we got to forecast how their investments and how their assets are going to grow over time. That also involves trying to pinpoint a goal, a pot. You know, what is it? What are we trying to do here? Are we trying to save up a pot of £3 million so that you can have £150,000 a year till the day you die? There are various tools and techniques we can do that, but 9 times out of 10, it's having a look at what they're spending now as a family and as an individual. Obviously, in inflation linking that. Typically, people say if you're in your 50s and spending X, you're probably going to spend 60 to 70% of that in retirement.
I had this with a professional athlete quite recently, asking them what they have now, what's their income now. So let's say, for example, someone's earning 100 grand a month or taking home £100,000 a month now, and you explain to them what £20,000 a month looks like, which is a £5 million pot. It terrifies people. So if you said to somebody, you need a £5 million pot to take home net £250,000 a year, £20,000 a month. Just building that picture very, very simply, keeping the basics in front of them, keeping everything very, very vanilla. That is where I think people actually forget how difficult it is to be earning a similar amount of money to what they are now in retirement. Does that make sense? Like, I think the simplicity of our job is literally just understanding what somebody earns now and making them look at what that would look like for the rest of their lives. And it will terrify the life out of people, which I don't think is a bad thing, because ultimately a lot of people in this country, I would say the vast majority of people we know, live month by month with what they have coming in. And nobody actually considers the day that they switch that tap off and it stops, whether that be through losing their job, whether that be through retiring, whether that be, wanting to retire early. A lot of people have lifestyles that could not be maintained with what they have or what they have planned. Often people just pay the bare minimums into pensions. People put the bare minimums into savings. Nobody has a real structure. And again, all the artificial intelligence and technology in the world does not give people that. Gives them the tools to do the research and make them think they know what the best investments are, but are they putting enough aside? What does it look like? Almost painting a picture. We always used to do this back in the days, is paint a picture of somebody's retirement, then take it away from them. But essentially it's people need to be able to picture it, then monetize it, and then build a plan. And I think that's the simplicity of our job. Sounds very easy, but it's up to us to implement it. Just going back to expats very quickly. Expats, so somebody moves overseas to work. What essentially happens with their pension if they move overseas? So let's say somebody's worked in the UK for 15 years. They get this dream job in Saudi Arabia. What happens with the pension? What should they really be doing for the next 5 or 10 years that they are overseas?
Yeah, so there's two pensions in the UK we're thinking here. So there's the state pension. Once you leave the UK or stop paying national insurance contributions, you will stop getting further contributions. In the UK, you need a total of 35 years worth of state pension, national insurance contributions to get the full state pension. So if someone moves abroad when they're 50 and they're going to stay abroad either forever or for 10 years, basically until they retire, whatever age it is, but it's worth looking at how many years worth of national insurance contributions are already built up, because it's not a lot of money in comparison with you being a UK resident to add additional years. And it's something that we would normally advise someone to do, is continue those national insurance contributions in the UK whilst they're an expat. And then the second thing is there are other pensions, whether that's workplace pensions, personal pensions, and they're going to obviously stop the contributions. You can, depending on what you have, you can maintain some level of contributions. If it was a personal pension, you're quite limited to what that is. And then, the scheme will stay where it is. But again, the reason we always say to look at your options is that, I mentioned it previously, as an expat, you are quite limited to what you can actually do with your money when you want to take it out. You will really struggle to buy an annuity. And then in terms of other ways that you can access your money, not all schemes allow you to draw down and take things flexibly. So it's a very common thing where I look at someone's pension. They've got, say, 200 grand in a pension. They're living in France. The only way they can access that pension is if they cash the whole lot in one go. And that might not be what's suitable for them given their tax situations. Again, seeking advice means we can potentially look at other options to put that into something that can be a bit more flexible of how they access it.
Yeah. And also, as well as there may be limitations on that overseas individual as to how they are able to take money out of the pension. From a beneficiary perspective, it is just often assumed that I have a UK private pension. I've been saving my life savings into it for the last 20 years. I'm now living in Saudi, to use your example. Everything's fine, but it is not a given that current pension provider, if, heaven forbid something happened to that individual and they had their wife and 2 children down as beneficiaries and they're also overseas residents, it's not a given that pension provider will actually set up something called a beneficiary pension for those overseas residents. They might also be forced to take a full taxable payment. Again, to go back to your point, the advice is always just to have a look under the bonnet, have a look what's the pensions made of, have a look how the provider would look after you when you're overseas. It might just be as simple as changing provider, and you can safeguard yourself so when it comes to take money out, it's with a provider that will give you the income how you want it, flexibly. And also, heaven forbid, if something happened to you, whoever you've got down as a beneficiary in that pension is actually going to be able to get it when they need it and not be forced to take a taxable payment.
How much do you think expats, and not just expats clients, but financial advisors, underestimate the benefit of a state pension? Because I know I was guilty of it. When I was working overseas, people would say, should I be paying my state pension? You'd be like, yeah, why not? But really now, when we look at what a state pension is worth to a married couple in terms of guaranteed income for life and the inflation links and all the rest of it, do you think there's an underestimation of the benefit of it?
100%. 100%. It's having done, which we will have many, many times, cash flow modeling, done retirement modeling with clients where you are literally stress testing their assets as to how long they're going to last them through retirement. If you're in a position where at 66, 67, you've got an inflation-linked guaranteed annuity, pension, whatever it might be coming through, can't stress enough how important that is, especially when you're running that kind of cash flow modeling scenario where someone's retired at 60 and you're seeing how long their income's going to last them or their money's going to last them until they die. If a husband and wife has got £12,000 a year coming in, inflation linked from their state pensions from 67, that's only going to inflate the older they get, it just does a lot of the heavy lifting for them.
Yeah,
Often you find that the kind of worrying years around financial planning and that trigger to am I going to retire or not, quite often it's if someone wants to retire at 55, it's from how do we manage your assets and your wealth from 55 until those state pension kicks in. Because then, using that husband and wife example, you've got 24,000 in today's money. If they're 55 and they're getting it at 67, probably going to be more like 35,000 at that point every year, inflation linked to the day they die, which just means, from a couple maybe looking to take 50,000 a year in retirement, 70% of their retirement income is going to come from a guaranteed source, which just means they're going to have to use far less of their own personal saved assets.
And then, like you say, when you've got people retiring, which is quite common when we're sitting down with someone that want to retire earlier than the state pension age, say 60 or whatever it might be, the biggest part of the pot is used in those, like, bridging that gap. Once the state pensions pay out, a lot of the time, the growth on their investments is covering the rest of that income. If they need an extra, using that example, 50k a year, and they're getting half of that from state pensions, if they've got a reasonably sized pot, then a lot of the time the actual returns on their pot would be covering the rest of that, from 67 till the rest of life, and that wouldn't happen without that state pension.
Going back on other expat stories, what's the strangest country in which you've taken on a client?
I have recently had a Teams call with a gentleman, in the United States, so you think this isn't going to go, where's this going to go? But the gentleman was in Hawaii, and let's just say he'd adopted that, beach life. He was an individual with quite a few body hairs, and he sported a wife beater vest for the Teams call. And there was probably more body on show than face.
What about the strangest place you had to go to visit a client? Kuwait was strange. Did you ever go there?
Never travelled.
Did you go to Kuwait?
I went to Kuwait. My only memories of Kuwait is just the heat and heading from Kuwait airport, which I think now is a nice, glamorous, brand new airport. It wasn't when we were travelling there, was it?
No, neither was Saudis.
And travelling to, if I'm not mistaken, the Hilton, where quite often a lot of the expats would either be positioned or staying there or go for dinner I'd have a very sweaty experience trying to get a taxi. Getting in the taxi, you always had to have cash. Obviously, there was no Uber. But no, interestingly, all those clients that I started working with in Kuwait all those years ago, I still work with. And they've all now retired to either the UK or Cyprus.
Do you know where I find wild now is, and I've seen it recently, I haven't been back for quite a while, is Saudi Arabia. So I remember when I first started going to Saudi about 10 years ago, first place I went to was Riyadh Airport. And I flew into Riyadh on a Friday because I was going for the weekend to suss the place out and meet a couple of potential clients and stuff. And got into the airport and their systems were down, so we were all queued up outside in the passport control. And there was a lot of, very, very unprofessional at the time. It was really old and scruffy, the airport. All the guys on the passport control desk were sitting there smoking. People were all sitting down, waiting to be seen and all the rest. I'm like, how am I in one of the richest countries in the world? Went into the airport eventually, once they got the systems working, in I went, came out of the airport thinking, oh God, that's got to be the worst part of it. And honestly, I'm not joking. All the cars smashed to bits. People driving around. Imagine you have to give way to the cars joining the roundabout. So you're driving in what is like Mario Kart going to the hotel. And the whole place was a dive. It was like, it was so scruffy. And then I got into the middle of Riyadh and you had Kingdom Towers. It was like, God, it's beautiful. And you look all around it and you're like, this is like a third world country. And then I went and met a client, and this is where the funny situation. So it was a client who worked at a football club in Riyadh, and he said, "I'm at this compound. Come down and meet me at this compound." So I drove down to the compound, pulled up outside, and I'm not joking. It was like an army checkpoint at this compound. So I walked over, showed them my passport. These guys holding big machine guns, and they said, "Wait, sit down for 5 minutes, and then we'll take you to the compound." Sat down for 5 minutes, looked at this board they had of just all these different faces of men in the local attire. I said, "Are they members of the royal family?" No, this is Al Qaeda. I was like, no, sorry, say that again. Yeah, if they come here, we shoot them. So you can imagine me sitting in Saudi Arabia, right, looking at this board, and I'm like, right, okay, they're in Riyadh. Oh yeah, they're here. Then they said, right, you can go now. So I went from this one checkpoint and I'm walking down towards the gates of the compound. And next to the gates, there's 2 army trucks with massive machine guns on the back pointing. Because if you've ever seen the film The Kingdom, there were actually some terrorist attacks in Saudi. So I've got into this compound, walked in, and I'm not joking. They told me where this guy that I was going to meet was. I walked into the compound and he was sat on the side of the pool in his Speedos, oiled up, sunbathing. I walked over and I said,
With your fact find.
with my briefcase, a full suit. "Hi mate, I'm Hamzah. Yeah, nice to meet you. Come on, let's go inside." Literally just walked up and sat in his swimming shorts, talking to me about his life in Saudi.
Wow.
Saudi was
What year was that?
That was probably 2014.
Wow.
Since then, I've got a few clients that are living there and they've shown me the place. I'm not joking. It looks like DIFC everywhere. It looks absolutely impeccable. The financial centre's all built. The roads are all clean. The buildings are beautiful. Like they've properly invested.
Looks more like Dubai now.
Literally.
I watched. There's a TV show out at the moment. Matchroom Boxing.
Yeah.
Watched the episodes. One of the latter episodes, they're dealing with the Saudi prince
Turkey. Yeah.
I can't remember his name. Anyway, there's a whole video sequence of them going to Riyadh, and I was absolutely blown away.
It is phenomenal.
You could have just mistook it for Dubai.
But there's photos of Dubai 20 years.
Yeah.
20 years, probably longer than 20 years, but maybe
But it's just
40 years ago.
the Saudi is a 10-year.
It's literally a
Gone from
10-year
this
flip.
to-
Yeah.
Whereas
In
Dubai-
fact, probably even less, 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
It has literally gone from brand new everything. Place looks impeccable. Tourists are going there. I've seen some on social media, some people that I'm friends with on social
holiday.
media going on holiday to Saudi, and I'm not joking, the resorts look unbelievable.
Really?
Maldives style,
Unbelievable. Like absolutely phenomenal. What a project. What a change. It's absolutely unbelievable. But it was probably the most colourful place that I've ever been to. And I actually can't wait to go back just to see the change. Because what I remember is 10 years ago. And to go back and see the transformation. And it makes me, I used to wonder why people would go and live there for anything other than money. And now when I see it, I think it's got to be such an exciting project. And if you look 10 years into the future, if you've worked there for the last 10 years and you look at it now, it must really, you've got such a great CV to be able to say, I built this and this. Like iconic places, that some of the first cinemas that have ever been built over there, they'll be the best in the world. Bowling alleys, arcades, leisure centres, sports facilities, like the best in the world. And they do, literally, when they build stuff, it's the best of everything. Phenomenal place. Absolutely phenomenal place. Best place a client's retired?
I have a client who I was very much of the thinking that they'd cracked it and he'd achieved his dream retirement. He was always obsessed with getting a boat. His plan was very much to go and live and retire in Australia. And we were very much structuring his assets and his wealth so that he could have a certain amount of income living in Australia. More importantly, be able to buy this big, beautiful boat. And I was, throughout that planning process of working with him for years, I still work with him now, won't ruin the story. For years, we were planning around having the cash available to be able to buy the boat. Anyway, he went and bought the boat. What are we not allowed to talk about now? Boats. Yeah. While we were going through that planning process, I was convinced this guy cracked it. I was like, this is following his dream, loves boats.
Most expensive thing in the world.
He calls it the money pit.
Wow.
And he actually ended up going back to work not because he needed to financially or anything like that, but just didn't quite fancy that boat setup. But at the time, I was convinced that was a fantastic retirement.
What about the more successful retirement project? So if you can think of one client that stands out, one each, that stands out that you took on years and years ago, has now retired, and it's just worked out beautifully for them. And you love to talk to them, you look forward to the meetings, and you also just think, not just financially, but in terms of a happy, successful retirement.
I'm very fortunate to have many clients that fall into that category. There's a recurring theme with them. There are a lot of individuals maybe 10 years ago, and you'll have come across this, both of you, who left the UK to go and better themselves, better their family, move overseas for a better paying job, whether it be in Qatar or Dubai. Lots of individuals, lots of families that I work with now who started working with 10, 15 years ago, who were in a completely different financial position, were kind of dreaming around being able to have, millions in pensions and all the investments and assets that they want, kids going through university, and now are living and breathing it. Have done a 10-year stint overseas, followed a fairly simple plan, but just saved, whether that's been because they've lived in a tax-free environment that's enabled them to save. That's definitely I think a contributing factor, but have gone and done it, and we're many clients where we're a couple of years away from retirement. And it's, I remind ourselves the conversations of like 10 years ago where it was like, oh, we dream we could do this. Well, now we are 2-3 years away, Johnny and so-and-so gone to university, you've got the pots you want, like you guys just need to now make the jump and buy that house you want to go and live in and do it. Yeah. I think.
What about you, Tom?
So, I mean, throughout that whole process, I was just thinking about one particular client that has worked with for years and years. He originally, I first met him in Dubai, and then when he moved back to the UK, I moved back to the UK shortly after, and we ended up half an hour away from each other. So we've continued that face-to-face relationship. But when I first met him in Dubai, he was very much from a working class background, hadn't been in Dubai for too long, didn't have a clue what his pensions were at all, thought he would be working till he was 67. At the time, wasn't a homeowner. So the long and short of it is that we looked at his pensions, did a retirement plan for him, and he ended up taking a fairly sizable tax-free lump sum from his pension and bought a villa over in Spain. So he now lives over in Spain where he's retired. And it was just through, I didn't do anything miraculous. It was just through planning and helping him understand like what he actually had and what he could afford to do. But ultimately, I say he, husband and wife, but they've now got their villa over in Spain and retired. And when I met them back in Dubai, they thought they'd still be working another 5 years and not owning a home. So that's a good example of that.
There's a recurring theme, isn't there? Is that those clients and those individuals you were referencing, I'm sure are the same as mine. They haven't gone and done anything revolutionary. They haven't won the lottery. They haven't, had any crazy investment returns. They've just done what a lot of people don't do in that overseas offshore market. And when they're expats overseas, is just really doubled down on the opportunity of, okay, I'm living in a tax-free country. I'm now not paying tax. Well, as a family, we're not just going to go and spend that money on, fancy cars, beach clubs and whatever. They've just followed a strict strategy, and through some planning with myself, and I'm sure with your clients, help them understand, right, that money you were paying tax in the UK, whether you're a 20% taxpayer, 40% taxpayer, if we just put that money aside into your pension, into a savings vehicle, we get it invested, it's going to enable you to do what you want, give you the retirement you want. That's as complex as it gets. They've just stuck to a plan.
Such simple vanilla financial planning that can work out, but I automatically think of somebody he's probably been a client of mine for 15 years. And when I met him, his kids were still at school in Dubai. Now I'm at a stage where both his kids have graduated. They've got their own jobs. We talk about the mortgage for his daughters and buying their first homes. He's now, he's semi-retired, did a bit of consultancy. Now he's fully retired. Literally just every time I speak to him, he's just happy. He's reasonably frugal. I call him tight, but just doesn't waste money on unnecessary things. Will jump on a freebie anytime he can. But as always, that exact scenario that you mentioned, just somebody that's been careful, but enjoyed themselves. And now they're in a position where they've got lots and lots of money, which just accumulates over time. If you're reasonably sensible, what seems like a little bit becomes a lot in the future. And has been reasonably sensible in his mid to late 50s. Now, bang, healthy, fit, lots of money, plays plenty of golf, exercises, travels for 2 or 3 months of the year, again on a budget, doesn't get carried away with anything. It's the little small things in financial planning that make a big, big difference as you get nearer and nearer retirement. Let's just change the subject slightly and go on to succession planning and family inheritance. What's changed over the last 2 or 3 years? What's likely to change over the next 2 or 3 years about succession planning, inheritance tax planning? Big ones that obviously jump out is pensions falling into estates from 2027. What are your biggest challenges at the minute with financial planning when it comes to inheritance?
So for me, I feel like it's a little bit of the unknown, because whilst and I feel like I'm experiencing this more than ever, because I'd say political instability in the UK is probably as high as it's ever been. I think a lot of people are a little bit unsure as to what legislation we're going to be looking at in the future. So that'd be the biggest not concern, but the biggest issue with our job at the moment is trying to advise under current legislation, whilst but a large part of clients are speculating about what might happen in the next general election and whether or not there's going to be changes with pensions or inheritance. A lot of people don't want to make lasting decisions now, just in case something comes in 2 years that completely changes what they could have done.
But I mean, politics aside, succession planning has definitely become a forefront of everyone's conversations, because in years gone by, it was relatively straightforward as a financial planner to use an individual's or husband and wives, families' pensions as a vehicle and a succession pot that we can plough as much as we possibly can into. If we're a UK taxpayer, fantastic, we're getting all the relevant tax relief. But then also in years gone by, we were able to just make sure we had the children down as beneficiaries, and that was an inheritance tax-free pot that you could pass on through your family. That obviously flipped on its head last year, and I know it's not entirely clear exactly what that legislation looks like, but in effect it comes into an individual's estate as of 2027, which has provided some challenges for financial planners. It's provided some real different conversations to have with individuals, but again, that's what we're here for. In some of the tools that we will use with individuals, but maybe not for that kind of level of succession planning, is looking at, okay, well now, the big concern is those pension pots that we've been building up over all these years are now of a sizable value. They're going to pass on to the spouse, inheritance tax free, but we need to be now planning for that second death succession planning. There's lots of things that can be done, and it doesn't necessarily have to be very complicated. Ideally, as with most things financial planning, the earlier you look at it, the earlier you start, the easier things are. Simple thing like having a life insurance policy that pays out upon second death. So at least if there is going to be an inheritance tax bill because your pension's of a certain level, at least there's cover.
Well, putting a bit more of a personal opinion on it, how fair do you think it is that that's all of a sudden just flipped?
I think one thing that I don't see spoken about at all in the media, certainly spoken about in our industry, is the actual level of tax that a beneficiary could actually pay on a pension. So the high level figures are that someone dies as of 2027 onwards, forgetting spousal benefits, but if it goes to your child, for example, they'll pay 40% inheritance tax. But you have to also factor in the fact that they'll pay income tax as well, and it depends on how that person takes that money. But if you've got someone who decides to cash the entire amount in one go, which I'm sure is going to happen, there's going to be lots of people that children want to buy a property or whatever, and they say, I've got access to a lump sum here, let's cash that in. The actual tax rate is going to be much, much higher than 40% when they add on income tax to that as well. And we're talking, I haven't got the exact maths on it, but probably over 70%. So to come back to your question, how fair is it? I don't feel that's fair, and I'm sure most people in the UK wouldn't feel it's fair that someone leaves a pension pot behind for their children and they pay up to 70% tax on that income.
It's driving some tricky conversations and some kind of changes in long-term financial planning you've been working on with clients, because a lot of people now think, and again, there's all sorts of hearsay around the tax-free lump sum and how that's going to be attacked in the next budget we've got coming up. But I've been approached a lot this year with clients and families saying, well, look, if my pensions are now going to be included in our estate, should we not? Although we haven't got a use for it, it's not included in any of our financial planning conversations. Are we now not better off taking out the tax-free lump sum? And again, that is very different. Depends on the individual as to whether that is even something to consider. If you're a wealthy individual who doesn't need it, there's no real need for that money, especially if you're somebody, if you're an expat living overseas and everything you're doing is in dollars, let's say you're living in the US, you kind of being forced to think, right, well, the best thing for me to do is to take 25% out of a pension because some legislation might change and because it might be part of my estate. Sounds great, but there's also an opportunity cost of it not remaining inside a pension where it grows free of tax. It's currently held in pounds. That example of someone living in the US, they take the tax-free cash. Well, it's in pounds. If their life's no longer in the UK, do they need pounds? No. They're going to have to think about some currency exchange, moving it to the country where they live. And then what are you going to do with it? If there's no real clear need for it to spend it, well, you're probably going to say, well, I'll invest it.
Start paying tax on it.
You're going to start paying tax on it.
How often do people tell us as well that pensions are there for retirement? Last resort, not encouraging people to take pension money, not encouraging them to take PCLS early. It's a big thing that our compliance talks about all the time is like pensions are for retirement. And now I feel as though maybe it's the press, maybe it's the new tax legislation or the new inheritance tax rules is almost encouraging people to take a benefit, a lump sum from their pension to mitigate that inheritance tax. So on one hand, you're trying to keep as much money within people's pensions until retirement, until to pass on in some way, shape or form. And then on the other hand, there's a bit of a incentive for people to go, well, if that's going to fall inside my estate, I'm going to remove that.
Yeah.
And what do we do as financial advisors when that happens? Because also the amount of bad press and, pension expert says, I'm taking my tax-free lump sum for this reason, even though I don't need it. And I've seen that headline in the papers. Yeah. And then, so everybody reads that headline and says, well, I'm going to take my tax-free lump sum. And then it doesn't change in the budget.
And this is literally why we have a job, because no one out there can just literally base what they're going to do on what someone else is doing, because everyone has a different situation. Like this guy you're referring to who's taking this lump sum because it might be right for his situation, but it might not be right for someone else because it might then cause a problem in something else. So yeah, I mean, it's why we have a job at the end of the day, to help people plan these individually for their situation.
True, but also if 2 weeks before the last budget, we're encouraging people to put money into their pensions, put money into their pensions because it wasn't part of their estate, and they're already at their nil rate band, their IHT allowance, and then 2 weeks later, the Chancellor then turns around and says, as of 2027, pensions are going to be part of your estate, and then so within 2 weeks, you're then going, well, that's just gone completely against all the advice I've been given. Yeah. And a client might say to you, maybe I should I have put that money into the pension if I'm already at my inheritance tax allowance? Now it's changed. And it's not our fault. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to blame advisors for it, saying we should do this, we shouldn't do this. Surely it makes our job more difficult if a law so big in our industry can flip like that.
Again, it's why we have clients and why we sit down with clients to have annual review meetings. I mean, we could talk about loads of the big changes over the years, the lifetime allowance going down and down and down, lots of planning around that. It was a weekly conversation and then one day it was abolished. There's just changes that are always going to happen, and it's why we have our annual reviews.
Lovely government operates in an annual budget deficit rather than a surplus. There's just changes. It is annoying, and again, I'm lucky enough to deal with individuals who've got assets in different countries, in the US and the UK as an example. The US retirement industry is huge, just as much as in the UK. They're heavily incentivized to put money into these vehicles. There are tax breaks, but they're not necessarily under attack or touched every time there's going to be a change of government. Whereas over here, it is disappointing that people's life savings, quite often, other than their house, it's their biggest asset.
I think
it's something they're now having to think about when, we're spending all this time and energy and effort with clients, helping them plan for retirement. Quite often, some of them are near that key point where they are thinking, we're a year, 2 years away, and we're now having to have forced conversations around, should I be utilising this because the government's going to do this, or is this hearsay? Because again, in the UK and around the world, something that we help clients plan for is healthcare costs, a cost of care when we get older. One of the benefits of that tax-free lump sum and kind of maintaining it as long as you can is, like most families, your main two assets are your house and your pension. If you get ill and you need to fly somewhere and get treatment, you're not going to sell your house. Yep, you might have some insurance cover, hopefully, that will pay you out. If you have also got some form of your pension asset that's still, accessible tax-free, you also know you've got another emergency pot that you can get on.
Change of subject. Did any of you watch the story of the V11 football's financial shame on the BBC, the documentary? Did you watch that?
I did.
What did you think?
For me, I mean, look, I was surprised about some of the individuals that were caught up in it. Just would have thought they would have had the right advice and advisors around them, made assumptions that, well, how could that individual be caught up in that, at the peak of his career, earning fantastic money? You would make an assumption they'd be getting great advice. I was shocked that that type of foul play went on in such a regulated environment, Delivering any form of advice in the UK is, as we spoke about before, heavily regulated, heavily monitored. That was biggest shock was for me that type of thing went on.
What do you think, Tom, of that program? Did you watch it? You don't have to lie. You didn't watch it. Okay, great.
No, I heard about it on TalkSport, but I haven't watched it, so I'm not going to comment.
For me, my immediate reaction to watching that was I almost felt ashamed of our industry.
Yeah.
With it being in the UK. It got my back up a little bit, thinking, what does a professional athlete now think of financial advisors? Are they going to be second guessing who they're working with, which they obviously will? I mean, these people were, when I was watching some of the cases, were at the weddings, they were going to family parties, they were going on holidays with them, all of these kind of things. And the ability across the course of like 2007, 2008 up to 2010, the ability to be able to manipulate such young people, which I think that was part of the problem, is that we often assume that people at that level have protection around them. They're so easily manipulated. And if I think of me myself in my early 20s, if somebody had come to me with these tax angles, and all these different schemes, I'd have probably been easily manipulated as well. It really, really did make me feel a bit ashamed of our industry. Also, on the flip side of it, I think it also shows that how being very, very vanilla in the advice that we give and just doing the very basics is so important before somebody looks to mitigate certain amounts of tax that they might pay, doing overly complex financial planning. I feel as though we need to just focus on anybody, whether it be a footballer or any kind of professional, is once you have your base in place so that you can't go bankrupt, so that you don't fall foul of any tax angles that you're taking, I feel as though everybody just needs to have those basics in place first of all, which is very, very important.
Definitely. And I think that's transferable to every client. I meet people every week who, I'll ask them, what are you looking to get out of the meeting today? And, quite often a lot of them will say, well, I'm currently invested in XYZ, and I want to get 17%, I want to get 18%, and they're chasing returns, or they're chasing something rather than, and quite often after 20, 30 minutes of a conversation, understand that they might not have a cash cushion, haven't got a retirement nest egg, haven't got a plan of what they're saving for, but are chasing a certain level. I'm like, look, if you're retiring in 10 years and you need to get 17% on your money to have the retirement you need, then fair enough. Let's have a look at how possible that is. But 9 times out of 10, people, I think, we're all guilty of it, to your point. We're all guilty of
overcomplicating it.
Well, overcomplicating, getting attracted to something.
Yeah, chasing the risk. As we approach the end of the tax year, what's one key financial lesson that stood out for you in 2025? I think for me, it is definitely the negativity, whether you like him or loathe him, and I'm not going to bring my personal opinions into him, but Donald Trump came into power at the start of 2025, and we had a lot of nervousness around the markets. And again, using the words that we shouldn't use, but trusting the process and just trusting the market and making sure that everybody's portfolios are aligned with their long-term returns. I feel like my biggest lesson from 2025, when we look at, so far anyway, what's happened since the markets had a bit of a dump at the end of the first quarter, is not to panic, not to react, remain invested. And I think everybody's clients, no matter what their risk tolerance levels, are going to be in close to double-digit returns for 2025.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, it was a really interesting time there, because as financial advisors, the end of the tax year, February, March, is when we have a lot of inflows of people investing new money, getting their ISA allowances, children's ISAs, pension contributions. And we had a lot of clients that put lots of money into their investments in March, and within a month were down 10% because of what happened with
Liberation Day,
tariffs. And there were some clients which were brand new clients to ours that probably thought, what have I done here? 6 months later, they're looking
7 or 8% up.
They're looking very, very healthy. So it's perfect example of that is key.
Okay, that's my example. Get your own.
I mean, no, but to build on that point, it's It's obviously not ideal when a client invests new money or when you're transferring an investment from a new provider to another and you reinvest the funds and there's a market dip or Liberation Day was probably once every 4 or 5 year event. Does not make pleasant reading, but actually you do go through a period of communication with that client that's probably beneficial in the long run, because we all talk about, we're making well-educated, informed investment decisions that match your risk tolerance, but we kind of just have to let the markets do their thing. And in a perfect world, all we are going to look for is if the markets drop, your investments drop. And when they recover, they recover. It sounds simple, but that type of event actually gives you far easier conversation next year of like, look, well, we know, your investments actually done exactly what we thought they would do. They followed the market. We've still, achieved the level of return we wanted to achieve, and we've had this event. That client has learned how, if they're a new client, they're new to investing, they've just seen how the markets work in a 12-month period. I personally like that type of thing.
And on that, a very similar note, I think the importance of keeping liquidity. So if you've got a client that's in retirement or a year or so away from retirement, having something that perhaps is in cash readily available, so that if there's a big downturn in the markets in the short term, they've got cash aside to take rather than having to dip into the investments.
So 2025's main thing is stay in the markets. That's the only one we've got, yeah?
Yeah. On your point, ignore the noise as an advisor, as an individual, as a father.
It's so difficult, isn't it? But you're right. It's so difficult at the time because when the press is full of negativity, when everybody's saying this is the worst time, when clients are saying to you, not a good time to invest, it's going to get worse, it's going to get worse. I've got clients that have told me for the last 5 years, there's going to be a big crash and don't want to be in the market. And then before you know it, or you go back and see them and you go, you decided to get in the market? Yeah, no, there's going to be a crash. It can't last forever. And there are going to be crashes.
There are. That's just the way the markets work. There's, they ebb and flow. But I have dealt with many individuals over the years who have thought they knew better and wanted to effectively time the market, or if nothing else, ride it out and sit in cash and wait for there to be a correction. I am yet to come across a client where that's turned out to be beneficial for them. It's always been a tail between the legs. I probably should have invested.
Thank you, Elliott and Tom, for your wisdom, your input, your knowledge, your good looks, your hairlines. This has been another fantastic podcast from Headway Wealth's Wealth Lens. We do specialise in looking after clients who live in all different jurisdictions, British expats all over the world. If you feel the need to get a second opinion on what you already have, or if you've got assets that are sitting in the UK that you need advice on, please feel free to reach out. My name's Hamzah Shalchi. Over and out.